Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm really excited. I'm not going to stand behind this because I feel like I'm just too short for this. So I'm going to stand over here so you guys can actually see me. But if you know me at all, you know that I'm someone that could probably talk about condors for like 10 hours. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try to keep this to 45-ish minutes. But I really want to give you guys a lot of updates with what we've been doing as Ventana Wildlife Society, and then kind of how the flock is doing, how condors are doing right now, really in the country. So real quick, I'm going to make a pretty safe assumption that most of you know what a California condor is, but is there anyone here that has never heard of California condor or needs like a quick 30-second rundown? Anyone? Okay, safe assumption. 30-second rundown? Okay. Condors are the largest land bird in North America. They are critically endangered, so there's only a couple hundred left in the wild. I'm going to give you some numbers on that later in the presentation. They're obligate scavengers. They only eat dead things, so they're kind of similar to turkey vultures and black vultures in that way. And they are about 20-ish pounds in weight, 10-foot wingspan, large birds. They have a really life history strategy that's really adapted to living for a long time and having a slower reproductive rate. So they nest about once every other year. We actually don't know how long they live completely because we've never had a condor die of old age, but the oldest condor right now is 55, I believe, if he's still alive. So we believe about 70 years is kind of their max lifespan. But that's your general 30-second-ish rundown on California condors. And I'll get into more specifics too, but general biology I'm going to kind of skip over for this presentation. Cool. So a quick timeline to run through some of the dates of what condor conservation has looked like up until this point. So 67 was when condors were listed as an endangered species. Shortly thereafter, they were really declining at that point and continued to decline. So in 87 was when the last free-flying California condor was captured and brought into captivity. And that was to start this captive breeding population so that condors would not go extinct for good. They were extinct in the wild in 87, but they were still living in captivity, thankfully also breeding in captivity. And so just a couple years later in 92 is when the first condors were released back into the wild in Southern California. And then shortly after that, in 97, was when the Ventana Wildlife Society started releasing birds in Big Sur. If you see the letters VWS, that's Ventana Wildlife Society. I abbreviated it in most of this presentation, as well as the next date on there is 2003, when Pinnacles started releasing condors. So PMP is Pinnacles National Park. So we work really closely with them, and I'll mention that a lot too, but they're kind of our co-monitoring agency for the Central California flock. And then 2006 was when we had the first condor nest in Big Sur, and that was really the first landmark of condors are recovering enough that they're now reproducing in the wild. So this is kind of what's happened in the past. That doesn't look good. Is it? Okay. Maybe my computer just wants to sleep. Okay. This is kind of where condors are at now, at least physically. This is their distribution. So we have 5 subpopulations of condors right now. So the Central California flock is really the flock I'm going to be focusing on today. But I do want to call out these other 4 populations. So there's a flock in Southern California. There's a new flock in Northern California that just started last year, which is really awesome, really exciting. A population in Arizona, Utah, and a smaller population in Baja, Mexico as well. So again, I'm going to be focusing on Central California. That is co-monitored by Mouton, Pinnacles National Park, National Park Service. It's kind of a joint effort between the 2 agencies. And also quick shout out, all of the maps that I'm going to show you were made by Evan McReese, who's one of our other biologists. So giving him a big shout out because he's made some great visuals for this presentation, and others that we do. So gives you kind of an idea where condors are today in the country. So we're going to answer a couple questions, 2 main questions in this presentation. First off is, what are we doing? What is Ventana doing? What is the Condor Recovery Program doing right now to help condors? Later on in the presentation, we're going to get to the question of how's it going? What are we doing? All these actions that we're taking to try to help condors, are they working? How are condors doing right now? And are those efforts effective? So I'm going to talk about these 5 main points up here. We do other things besides these 5 things, but these are kind of the 5 main things. Again, if I was talking about everything that we did, we'd be here all night. So I'm going to condense it down a little bit for the sake of time. And a lot of these photos, this photo is taken by Tim Huntington, who's a long-term volunteer with us, and actually designed our database that we use to record data for condors. There will be other pictures in here by him. If they're really great pictures, they were probably taken by Tim, because he's an awesome photographer. So the first thing on our list, trapping and handling. This is something that we're doing right now to help condors. And we do this for a number of reasons. So the primary reason is we're replacing transmitters on birds. We have both radio transmitters as well as GPS tags on condors. And those are all battery powered in some way, shape, or form. So when those batteries die, the tags need to be replaced. So that's one reason why we're trapping and handling birds. When we do that, we're also drawing blood and we're checking the lead level in that blood. And so I'll talk about lead more in this presentation, but it is the leading cause of death for condors. So that's a really important reason why we handle birds. We do a general health check when we're handling birds, give them a once over, we take their weight and things like that, make sure they look healthy. We give them a West Nile virus vaccination. We take feather samples, so there's a study going on. We partner with UC Santa Cruz, Myra Finkelstein at that lab, and she's doing a study on exposure in condors. Lead is deposited into feathers, and so as that feather grows, you have this beautiful timeline of lead exposure in a bird's life while that feather was growing. So we take feather samples for that study, and then right now we're doing sampling for HPI, highly pathogenic avian influenza. I'm going to talk about this later because I'm sure that is something that many of you are aware of and have heard about, but that is something we're actively doing right now as well when we're handling birds. We're taking a lot of precautions too. You can see that photo on the left there is handling one of our birds that we released this past year. And we wear these full suits, we wear masks, we wear gloves, everything to protect the birds and protect ourselves. And then on the right here is me putting a tail transmitter on a condor. That I will actually talk about the specific condor later in the talk as well. Another big part of what we do is tracking birds. So we do this in a couple different ways. We do it via radio telemetry with those radio tags that are on birds. We take visual observations of condors, both on our live cameras that we have set up at our feeding sites, and also through wild feeding events and wild visual observations of birds. And then as well, we have GPS units attached to some of our condors, so we're tracking them through their GPS units. So this picture here is just a picture of what some of those tags look like. They have this vinyl identification number, and these are some of the various tags that are attached. And then this photo here, I want to give a big shout out to, we actually started a volunteer program in 2022 that's brand new. It's the first time Ventana's had a volunteer condor tracking crew. And they've been a huge help to us in tracking condors along the coast, along Highway 1. So I want to give a big shout out to them. Some of them are here tonight, and they're just super awesome people. They've been amazing to work with, and they've really helped us just in terms of being able to be out in the field consistently, constantly looking for birds. So they're collecting awesome data and being a huge help to condors. Another big part of what we do is release condors into the wild. So every year we get about 4 to 6 birds to release into the wild that were bred in captivity. We've been releasing birds at our San Simeon field site since 2015. And Pinnacles also releases birds as well. Typically these birds we get in like August or September, and then they have a couple months to kind of get used to the weather in San Simeon. They meet some of the wild birds, they hang out for a little bit, get a little acclimated to their environment, and then they get released. We do that via a soft release method, so we're not just chucking them out there into the wild. And they've done really well with that method. It's a really great way to integrate them slowly into the flock. And that happens in about November, December time of year. So I'll talk about that more later as well. This photo on the right here is a bird that we released this year. So I just love that photo. I think one of our interns took that photo. It's an awesome one. A big part of what we're doing right now is nest monitoring. So right now we're basically in peak condor breeding season, nesting season. And so pairs typically nest every other year. I say typically because there are a few pairs of pinnacles that have started nesting every year, which is great. We love it. They only lay 1 egg, so the clutch size is just 1. I did try to point out this little egg down here. I don't know if you can see it in that photo, but that's an example of what a redwood cavity looks like. Some of you might have seen this. We had a live cam set up on this redwood nest, I think 2 years ago now. So that's an adult condor in the nest with that egg, little avocado-sized egg. And that incubation period is about 2 months. So the egg is an egg for 2 months, it hatches. Once it hatches, that chick remains in the nest for another 6 months until it fledges. And then once it fledges, it's pretty much dependent on its parents for another 6 months beyond that. So it's a really long nesting period, which is why they typically nest every other year. And we'll talk more about that. We do typically have redwood nests in Big Sur, so this is another example here. This is some of you know the story of Aniko. This is little baby Aniko when she was about 2 weeks old. And then over at Pinnacles, they have a lot of cliff cavity nests that look kind of like that. This is Condor 828, who was the first wild fledge from Pinnacles in over a century. Pretty cool bird. So another big part of what we do is mitigating threats to condors. So we can release as many condors as we want, and condors can reproduce as much as they want, but if condors are still dying at a really high rate, the population is not going to recover long term. So this is a big part of what we do, and like I alluded to a little bit earlier, lead poisoning is the leading cause of death for condors. So they're getting the lead from the food that they eat, so they're obligate scavengers, they're eating anything that has died, so that means if it's something that has been shot, they're also eating that. And so when it's shot with lead ammunition, you're seeing this fragmentation here. Lead is a really soft metal, so when it hits an animal or hits its target, it fragments really easily. And then when condors go to consume that carcass, they're picking up those little lead fragments. And it doesn't take very much lead to kill a condor. It doesn't take very much lead to really kill any mammal or animal. As we know with humans, it's really, really toxic. So thankfully there are alternative ammunitions, like this non-lead bullet trap you can see there, that don't fragment. They don't produce that fragmentation, and they're made of non-toxic metals. So that is why we have the free non-lead ammunition program. If many of you probably know Mike Stake, or have heard his name around, he runs our free non-lead ammo program at Ventana. And this is a really important thing because we're giving this ammo away to hunters, ranchers, anyone who's shooting anything in condor habitat in the Condor range. And we're giving it away for free, and then we're also helping with the background checks through the Department of Defense and things like that, that are sometimes roadblocks for people to get that ammo. So we try to make it as easy as possible for people to get this ammo if they want to try it out and want to use it. So far we've given away over 13,000 boxes. That number is probably even higher since this program began in 2012. So that's kind of what we're doing, a very brief summary. So how are things going? I want to dive into some of the updates from the past year and from what's happened so far this year. So we're going to get into all of these things, starting with the status of the population in Central California. So right now, in the total world population of condors, we're at 561 birds. All of these numbers are from the beginning of 2023. So January 1st, 2023, this is where things stood. Things have changed since then, and I will go into that. But right now, or as of the beginning of this year, not right now, we had 347 wild condors, and you can see the breakdown kind of what that looks like amongst the different populations. Central California, we were at 94 birds at the beginning of this year. And so to put that kind of into perspective, I think it's hard to just see those numbers and be like, oh, that's a pretty small population, but what does that look like relative to condor recovery in general? Here's kind of where we're at in terms of how far we've come. This data is from 2010 to 2022. So you can see there's been this general upward trend. 2020 was a rough year, so you can see this little dip in the timeline there. This red line is the wild population, so it pretty closely mirrors the total population. But generally, we're still on an upward trend. There's been a few little dips here and there. But we're still increasing every year, which is a great sign. To break that down in terms of our flock here in Central California, right now, as of today, we are at 91 birds. So that number, you've noticed, has gone down a little bit from the start of the year. That is mostly due to these birds over here, the 5 condor deaths that we've had so far this year. So 3 out of the 5 of those were confirmed lead poisoning. We've already gotten those necropsy results back. We're still waiting on one, and that other one was a trauma-related death. And then in terms of how those numbers happened in 2022, we had 4 chicks fledged from wild nests in 2022. We released 8 new birds into the wild in 2022, and then we had 8 mortalities in 2022. So we had 8 mortalities from the whole year in 2022. We've had 5 so far this year. So it's been a bit of a rough start to the year, I won't lie to you. And then in terms of what we have to look forward to this year, we have 5 eggs in nests right now in Central California, and we have 2 chicks in nests right now in Central California, and I'll dive more into that later as well.
When you say trauma, is that like a hit by a car or?
So that one was actually a landslide. Yeah, pretty wild scenario, but it happened during all those crazy storms that we got during those winter storms. So we think the Condor was just in the wrong place at the right time and got caught in that landslide. Yeah. So an update on trapping and handling. How is that going? As many of you know, our Big Sur site actually burned down in the 2020 Dolan fire, and we've been working on rebuilding it ever since. It is still not finished, but it's getting really close. We're in kind of the home stretch. We can see the light at the end of the tunnel, if you will. And so we're hoping that'll be done in spring, summer 2023. A lot of the reason why we haven't made a lot of progress on it so far this year is because of this photo here, which is what our road to get up to the facility looked like for a while due to all this rain we've been getting. There's been tons of redwoods that have come down. Roads have just been completely washed out. So we actually weren't even able to get up to the site for months at a time. So we are able to now that things have dried out a little bit. So we're making good progress on that and trying to get that finished as soon as possible. But that's been a big roadblock for trapping birds. Thankfully, Pinnacles National Park has a working trapping facility. Thankfully, condors go over there all the time, and it's a spot they hang out. So Pinnacles, big shout out to their crew. They've been trapping all the Central California flock, all the birds that we need them to trap. And they've been doing a really awesome job. We've been helping them out with handlings and things over there, but we have not been doing that out here on the coast. And real quick too, I did forget to mention this, but I might say Ventana bird or Pinnacles bird when I'm talking about specific condors. It's kind of a confusing terminology, but just to break down what that means, there are certain birds in the Central California flock that are either Ventana managed or Pinnacles managed. They're all part of the same flock. For the bird's sake, it doesn't mean anything. It just refers to the agency that's actively responsible for that individual bird, and they get that delineation based on either where the bird is hatched or where it was released. So birds that hatch out on the coast in nests on the coast are automatically Ventana birds. Any birds we as Ventana Wildlife Society release into the wild are Ventana birds. But again, a Ventana bird could hatch out on the coast and spend its entire life over in Pinnacles. Doesn't mean anything to the birds, but if you hear me say that, that is what I mean. Perfect. So the next thing I want to talk about is a little update on how our tracking efforts are going. This is a great map that kind of shows an overall summary of condor movements in 2022. So that kind of yellowy, large shaded area is the California Condor range in California, both the southern and central California flocks. And then it's a little bit tricky to see, but there's this teal, smaller area. That's the Central California flock range, kind of overall, accumulatively from the past several years. And then that gray shaded area is condors in 2022. Again, these are only birds that have GPS units attached. So that's not all of our birds. There could have been birds that went farther than that, but those are the birds that we know about based off their GPS movement. So 2 kind of notable movements that are highlighted on this map is this journey up north by Condor 569. She went up near Fremont, California and went pretty far north, hung out and then came back down. And then 904, Condor 904 kind of did the opposite. He went really far down south towards the Southern California flock. And then hung out for a day and then turned around and came right back. He decided he wanted to remain a coastal bird. So just some really cool movements that we're able to know about this from GPS. If that bird didn't have a GPS on him, we would have not known that he did that cool flight. So just all the kind of interesting information we get from those GPS units is fascinating and it's super informative. It helps us determine where the best places to track for these birds, where areas to focus on for tracking and monitoring these individuals.
Question.
Yes.
So where is Pinnacles on that map?
Yeah, so Pinnacles National Park is there.
Oh,
A little
okay.
red dot. Yep.
Oh.
Cool. So how is our captive release program going? It's going really well. We've been really successful with it. This past year, in 2022, we released 4 new birds into the wild. at San Simeon, and then Pinnacles National Park also released 4 birds over at their field site. So we live stream all of our releases now. These are just some still shots from those live releases of birds leaving the pen. Pretty awesome. So yeah, if you guys ever want to watch those, again, they typically happen in November, December, but we advertise them pretty widely, and anyone is always welcome to tune in and watch those. Sometimes they're kind of uneventful for a while because you're just sitting around waiting for the birds to leave. But this year, Condor 1100 Madrone, as soon as we opened that door, she was gone. She took off and flew around for a while and came back. But it was really cool to see that. Don't tell the others, but she's my favorite bird out of this cohort of 4 birds. She's just super adventurous. She's definitely the most dominant bird. She's kind of just this patriarchal figure that is just teaching the other birds what's what. She's done a lot of exploring since then. She hasn't quite made it up to the Big Sur site yet, or made it over to Pinnacles yet, but she's definitely done the most traveling out of all of them. So she's a really cool bird. Then these other 2 birds, so Madrone, Yarrow, and Buckwheat, were all named after California native plants. Ventana does give nicknames to all our birds, and that's just to help the public kind of identify with them more. And numbers are kind of hard to resonate with, so we give them all nicknames and we try to have a theme. So these 3 were named after California native plants, and then Wild Bill was actually named after a legacy donor. We wanted to honor him and his contribution to Ventana's work, so Wild Bill was named for him, 1085. So 2 males, 2 females, nice even split, and they were released on November 5th. Oh, and then these 2 beautiful women here are our 2 interns from 2022, Camden McMillan and Katie O'Connell. So I want to give them a huge shout out. They had to deal with a lot of unexpected surprises during their internship. They were here for 6 months, and their primary job was really just taking care of this cohort of 4 birds. As soon as they arrived, and then they watched them until they left the pen, and then they continued to monitor them, keep track of them, and see how they were doing, transitioning to life in the wild. So they were super important to our crew, and just were really a phenomenal cohort of interns to work with as well. So I want to give them a big shout out for all the work they did. So the fun stuff, baby condors. Nest monitoring is happening right now, and here's an update on how it's going this year. We have 3 Ventana managed active nests, and then there are 4 active nests that Pinnacles is managing as well. So one of those nests is 646 and 204. They're a pair that have nested together many years. They're a pretty strong duo. This is a picture of what nest monitoring usually looks like, if you can even tell what's going on in that photo. So it's great when we have these nests that we can just set up a live camera on and see right into them, but that's usually not the case. Some of these redwood cavities are kind of tricky. So right there are a clump of condor tail feathers sticking out at the end of the cavity. So that is what showed us that this pair was nesting in this nest. This is a redwood cavity nest. So they are actively nesting, and we think their chick hatched. We're pretty sure that chick hatched on March 27th. We're actually going to go check out that nest tomorrow, so hopefully we'll be able to probably not see a chick because it'll be inside the cavity, but at least see the parents hanging out. And then 2 other nests, we have 626 and 729, which are a new pair this year. 626 is an 11-year-old female. Condors reach breeding age at about 5 or 6 years old. So she's been breeding age for about 5 or 6 years, and she's just taken her sweet time. She's never nested before, and so this year, I don't know what about 729 did it for her, but this year she decided to settle down. So we're really excited about this pair. They're super awesome, and their chick is due to hatch towards the end of April. And then similarly with 550 and 652, their chick is going to hatch in just a week from today, we expect. And they're a really solid pair. They've nested together before, so we expect good things from them too. In terms of Pinnacles birds, they have 1 chick right now, 317 and 330 have a chick. And then 2 of these pairs, 236 and 340 and 569 and 589, are both pairs that have done the amazing thing of deciding to nest every single year and just deciding that they understand the assignment, that they need to reproduce, and we love that. So I think 569 and 589, this will be their 3rd year in a row nesting successfully. So they're an amazing pair. Pinnacles is going to go put a camera in that nest tomorrow to get more visuals of that chick, but really cool pair there. And then the final pair there, little stinkers, 726 and 692. They actually laid an egg early on in the season. That nest failed, but they tried again. They laid another egg this year. So really exciting when condors do that too. The more eggs, the merrier. And then we have 2 suspected nests right now for Big Sur that we have not fully confirmed yet. Mostly that is due to, again, the rain, the road conditions. We have an idea of where these nests are, we just haven't been able to get out there. So one of those nests is 538, Miracle, and 219, Puff Daddy. Miracle is a bird, she's a female, so that has nest recovery for sure. Another big threat that we're facing right now is H-Pi. I talked about it a little bit before, highly pathogenic avian influenza. So many of you guys have heard a little bit about this. There was a press release that came out on April 7th, kind of talking about what's going on with the Arizona-Utah population. But previously, we suspected condors could contract H-Pi. It is something that kind of ebbs and flows every couple of years. There's a big spike in cases. Condors have never been documented with H-Pi before, but unfortunately now they have. So April 7th, there's the press release that went out. There are 3 confirmed cases of H-Pi in deceased condors. The Arizona-Utah flock has lost and collected 8 dead condors from the field. All 8 of those are suspected to be H-Pi. Only 3 of those are confirmed. The numbers get a little confusing, but basically with the testing they have to do, they just haven't 100% confirmed that all 8 of those are H-Pi, but it's highly likely that they are. And then right now there's 4 birds that are still alive, but that are in quarantine, all suspected positive for H-Pi, but have not 100% confirmed that yet, but are all showing symptoms of H-Pi and are receiving supportive care at the Liberty Wildlife Center. So they're doing everything they can for those birds to try to help them recover. This outbreak is ongoing, so there is supposed to be a press release, another one coming out fairly soon, but those numbers are going to rise and have risen. It's definitely, it's tough. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's not something that is, just going to go away overnight. It's an ongoing thing, and it is going to continue to be an issue. And so, yeah, really just want to give a shout out to the Arizona-Utah crew. They are doing absolutely everything they can, just working down to the bone to try to protect their birds, to try to do everything they can for the remaining living birds out in the wild, and also just recovering, any birds that have died. So just really want to give a big shout out to them. Our hearts are definitely with them 100%. In terms of what Ventana is doing right now, this is at the forefront of our minds. And so there's a couple steps that we're taking right now to try to prepare for this as much as possible. The reality is, kind of looking at this map here, it's divided up by counties, but kind of those red counties are the highest level of cases. But basically you can see that pretty much in this red boundary is the Condor range, yellow boundary is Central California Condor range. H-Pi is here. There are documented cases in wild populations, and we now have confirmation that condors can get H-Pi. And so it's something that is at the forefront of our minds, and we need to do everything we can to prepare for it, because it's highly likely that it will happen here in California in our population. So what are we doing? We are following really strict biosecurity measures. So when we're handling birds, like I showed you those pictures earlier, we're wearing those giant marshmallow Tyvek suits. We're wearing gloves, we're wearing masks, we're sanitizing with foot baths, we're sanitizing all our equipment. We're doing everything we can to both protect ourselves and the condors. H-Pi is transmissible to humans as well, so we definitely want to keep ourselves safe, but also the birds, of course. And then we are testing every single bird, regardless of if they're showing symptoms, or which none of our birds have shown any symptoms yet, but regardless, we're testing every single bird, we're swabbing them. We do an oral swab and a cloacal swab, and then we also are testing their blood serum as well, shipping that off to the labs to get tested, just to try to catch it as early as we can. Again, we have not documented it in any condor in the state of California as of today. And then we're also in the process of constructing emergency quarantine pens. So we're building these pens away from all the wild birds, away from all the captive birds, totally by themselves. And these pens, really the purpose of these is going to be a place for condors to go if we have a condor that we think could have H-Pi, or a condor that has lead poisoning and that needs to get treatment, but we can't just immediately ship them off to a zoo to get treatment because they could also have H-Pi and we might not know. So those tests take a couple days to come back, those results, and so they need a place to go in the meantime while we're waiting for those results. So these quarantine pens are really crucial for that as well. So that's what we're doing in terms of trying to prepare for this, as well as arranging veterinary support. So we partner with a lot of different veterinarians both the Oakland Zoo, LA Zoo, and locally here at the Avian and Exotic Clinic. And so we're in talks. We just had a meeting today with them as well. So we're constantly communicating about this and trying to stay on top of it, getting a protocol in place for what happens if and when most likely we get a bird in Central California showing symptoms of H-Pi. So we're doing the best we can to prepare for it, and it's our number one concern right now, in addition to lead poisoning, as always. So what can you do? I wanted to give you guys a little bit more information about some things that you can do and just to be aware of. If you do see a dead or sick animal, you can report that to California Department of Fish and Wildlife. They have a mortality reporting form. I put the link up here, and I can leave this up after the talk too if you want to write any of this down. But any time that they get reports is just more data for them to report on. So this map is reported cases, but the cases are probably much higher than that. They're just hard to report because people don't report a lot of dead animals. So that is something that you can do if you do happen to find dead birds or dead animals. Things that you personally want to take precaution of. You want to keep your family, including pets, a safe distance away from wildlife. You don't want to feed or handle or approach any sick or dead animals or their droppings. So H-Pi is really transmitted through fecal matter, so you don't want to mess with that. If you're looking at an animal and you're trying to figure out if it's sick, symptoms you want to look for are lethargy, incoordination, presenting as dull or unresponsive, holding head in an unusual position, and walking in circles. Many of these symptoms for condors are very similar to symptoms of lead poisoning in condors. And so that presents some tricky difficulties as well. Both of these things are affecting the neurological system of an animal, so that's where you get the incoordination from. They're just going to look a little off. They're not going to be behaving normally. So if you do happen to see a California condor exhibiting any of these symptoms, you're going to call Ventana Wildlife Society or Pinnacles National Park. We're staying on top of it, but if you guys are recreating in Big Sur or over at Pinnacles National Park, there's a chance you could always see that, so definitely report that. And then if you want just more info on avian influenza, I just put the General Fish and Wildlife Service information on there, but there's lots of good information there and resources. I did also put the links for Peregrine Fund's page up there. Again, Peregrine Fund is the agency that monitors the Arizona-Utah population. They're a nonprofit, and they just put out this emergency call for donations. So if that's something that you're willing and able to do, I know they would really appreciate it. They definitely can use all the support they can get right now. And again, we're just really, our hearts are with them right now. It's definitely a nightmare scenario for sure for them. And then as well, I put our Ventana webpage up if you want to read more on our website and what we're doing to deal with this issue, as well as donate to us as well. So feel free to copy those down, or I can leave them up after the presentation too. Okay, happy stuff. So I want to really focus on a couple of birds that have just really inspired me over the past year and this year as well. It's easy to focus on the negative stuff sometimes, and that is what a lot of our work is about, is preventing the bad stuff from happening. But I really want to take time to celebrate the big milestones and the big accomplishments and some of these just amazing birds that are part of our population. So the first one is 171. Her nickname is Traveler. She was a bird who last year in February, she was nesting with her mate 209. We presumed their nest had failed just based on the activity of the pair. We weren't able to track either of them during that time because neither of them have working transmitters, so it was a little bit tricky, but we called their nest failed. Spoiler alert. And then in June of 2022, we trapped Pinnacles trapped 171. She was showing signs of lead poisoning, and they definitely wanted to stay on top of that, so they trapped her immediately, which was awesome. Again, huge shout out to Pinnacles. Then they transported her straight to Oakland Zoo for treatment. Oakland Zoo did all the preliminary treatment that they could, but unfortunately there was lead fragments really far down in 171's digestive tract, and so they weren't just going to come out on their own. She needed emergency surgery, so she went down to LA Zoo, which has a vet there who's one of the only people in the world that can perform the surgery because it's such a rare, condors are super rare to begin with, and the surgery is just not something that a lot of vets have experience with. So she was flown down to LA Zoo by Light Hawk, who's a volunteer pilot group that we work with. Thankfully that surgery was successful. She began her recovery at the beginning of July. And then after 2.5 months of recovery, it took her a long time to recover because her lead poisoning was really severe, she was released back into the wild on September 9th, 2022. She's still alive in the wild. She's doing great. So this photo is her with her mate 209 there. This is her when she was in captivity getting treatment. And then this is me putting that tail transmitter on her right before she got released back in Big Sur. So really just an insane story, and we talk about these birds getting lead poisoning and recovering, and it's hard to know what that looks like, but she was a case where her lead poisoning was so severe that I think I can speak for all of us when we say like none of us really had much hope she was going to make it. It was pretty dire. So the fact that she survived was just incredible. We were all blown away. But the story doesn't end there. So incredibly, in January, at the end of January this year, we had a surprise mystery chick show up at our Big Sur sanctuary. So when condor chicks hatch in the wild, they don't have any tags. They're what we call untagged birds, like these two kiddos here. And so we thought we only had one successful nest on the coast in Big Sur in 2022. So we were really only expecting to see one untagged juvenile out there. And instead we had two. So we're like, where did the second one come from? And it started hanging out with 171 and 209, that pair, and it was doing all of the things that a condor chick would do to its parents, like wing begging for food, preening with the parents, sitting next to them, flying around with them, feeding with them. And so we have not trapped this bird yet to get its genetics to confirm 100%, but all indications point to the fact that this chick is 171's. Which is incredible that she, was raising a chick with lead poisoning, had this incredible recovery story while she was in captivity for 2.5 months. Her mate, 209, was raising this chick by himself, without her help, doing clearly an amazing job. The chick survived, fledged, is doing great. And on top of all that, 171 has actually never laid a fertile egg that hatched before. She had issues with DDE, really thin eggshells early on when she was nesting. And so she hasn't had a biological chick before that's been hers. And so, yeah, if this chick turns out to be hers, it will be her first biological offspring. So just really incredible story. You can't make this stuff up. You can't write it. It writes itself. It's, just such an inspiration. So that's 171's story. Another bird I want to highlight is our one-legged wonder, 663 Unibrow. This story kind of starts in 2021, actually, when Unibrow had a leg injury. The leg was broken. We could tell visually it was clearly had been broken in some way. We don't know how, but that leg actually went necrotic and ended up falling off. And he ended up with a one leg. So he has a stump leg there that's healed up nicely. We had no idea. This has never happened before. This is the first time instance of this happening in a wild condor. We knew that he would not live a life in captivity. He wouldn't be able to survive in captivity really well, so the decision was made to leave him out in the wild. He was surviving on his own. He was finding food, and we wanted to give him the chance to figure it out and try to remain a wild condor, and he did. He's been thriving. This picture was from just a month or so ago, I believe. And yeah, he's flying around, he's finding food. He actually has a little crop, you could tell in this photo, that's storing some food. So he's doing everything a wild condor should be doing, which is just incredible. We've never had this happen before. But if you would have asked me in 2021 if this bird would still be alive, I would have said definitely not, and here he is. So just another amazing story of how resilient these birds are, and the things that they can deal with and thrive in spite of. And then finally, I want to end with Aniko, our star bird, probably our most famous condor in the flock right now, just because I know a lot of you have heard her story, so I want to give you a little update on where she is and how she's doing. If you don't know her background, she was in a nest in Big Sur in 2020 when the Dolan fire burned through. She survived the fire inside her nest, but then had to be taken to the LA Zoo afterwards due to some complications. She was totally fine. She is a healthy bird, but she was kept at the zoo until she was ready to be released back into the wild. She was released in December of 2021, and then she has since rejoined the wild flock fully. She is a very charismatic, dominant bird for her age. She likes to stir up trouble wherever she goes, and we love that about her. She's got a good personality for sure, and she keeps the other birds in line. This is a shot of her feeding with a bunch of other condors, including her mom, Redwood Queen. But interestingly, she was hatched in this nest out on the Big Sur coast. But you can see this is kind of a breakdown of her GPS activity in 2022. And she spends most of her time in Pinnacles National Park and in wild areas around Pinnacles National Park, a little bit in San Simeon where she was released, and not very much in Big Sur. So she has decided she's a Pinnacles local and spends most of her time over there. So we don't see her as often out on the coast, but who knows, that could change as she matures. But she's doing great over there. Every time I've been over there, I've seen her harassing the other juveniles. So it's great. She's an awesome bird. She's doing what she's supposed to be doing and just being a fun bird. So her story is another great one that I wanted to highlight and let you all know that she's doing great. And that's it. Can you believe it? I did talk for 3 hours. I do want to give a quick shout out just to the rest of the crew at Ventana. The other biologists are here, so you can talk with them as well if you have other Condor questions. But I just want to give a big shout out to them. It's been such an honor to work on this project. I just can't say enough about the people that I work with, and just being a part of this program it's an incredible opportunity, and I definitely don't take it for granted. It's incredible. The birds teach us so much, and I've learned so much from the people that I work with, and just I'm so proud of all that we've been able to do, and proud of what we continue to do and try to help these birds recover. So just want to give a big shout out to them. And then, yeah, if there's time, and if anyone would like to answer questions publicly, I'm happy to take questions. If you don't want to ask a question in front of everyone, feel free to talk to me afterwards. I can hang around for a little bit for sure. And then I put my email up here too if you have any questions you want to email to me, or if you're interested in our volunteer program and you want to talk more about that, either come talk to me or you can shoot me an email as well. But yeah, if anyone has any questions right now, yes?
How are the numbers given? It looks like some of them are over 1,000, maybe for the chicks.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, et cetera.
Yes, yeah, so the stud book numbers, basically a bird gets a stud book number when it hatches from the egg. Yeah. So they're in chronological order. So like 171 is going to be older than 1031, an ego. So they're given that number when they hatch from the egg, and it's just in chronological order. There's basically this person that manages the giant stud book, which I just picture them as this person sitting in the library with a giant book of condors and like writing them in a quill pen or something. I don't know. It's not how it is. I'm sure it's database, but it's pretty cool. So they're the ones that decide. We send them, hey, we just had a chick hatch, and they say, okay, the chick stud book is this. So they're coordinating with both us and then all the other flocks and all the captive breeding programs. So they're all on the same numbering scale.
I see. So it doesn't have anything to do with region or anything like that?
Okay. No, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
I know that the numbers are also color coded, so with the first one like red is 9 or something, do you have the list of what those
yes,
are?
so if you want to take one of these, this has our whole color coding system in here. So yeah, we have different colors from 1 to 1,000, and then well, I don't know if I did point out one bird that has a stud book number that's now 1,100. So to delineate those, we're putting an underline under the number and then just rotating back through the colors. So 1,100 are going to be red tags, just like the 100 birds are also red tags. If that makes sense. So basically how the tags work, let me go back to the picture of the tag. You can kind of see it there. So yeah, so this is Condor 1087. So the color of the tag tells you the first part of that stud book. So orange tags are all 1,000 birds. So this bird is 1,000, and then the 87 tells you the rest of the number. So like Madrone, I have a picture of her tag somewhere. Her tag looks like that. So she is Condor 1100. So she is 1,100. So she has a red tag with an underline and a 0. So once you kind of get it, it makes sense, but it's a little convoluted. But yes, take one of these or look at it if you want to see what all the colors mean. There's also condorspotter.com, which I know some of you are familiar with, but it has all of the tags on there organized by flock. So if you see a condor in Central California, you can go to the Central California flock, and let's say you saw a yellow tag with a 4, you can search yellow tags, and then you can look for the one with a 4, and it'll tell you exactly who that bird is. That's 204 amigo. But yeah, so if you do see a condor or you have pictures, you can also send them to us too. If you observe condors, we'd love to hear about that. Yeah?
If you see a condor that's ill or you think you suspect something's wrong, what's the process of capturing them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it varies. It kind of depends on how sick the bird is. So like with blood poisoning, Lead poisoning takes a while. It's not an instantaneous thing. It's not like as soon as they eat the lead, they start getting sick. They do, but it takes a long time to see those symptoms show up, and it depends how much lead they've ingested as well. So really what we start to look for is those early symptoms, the incoordination, loss of balance, loss of coordination, isolating from other birds. A bird will kind of just like drop off the map. When we're tracking these birds, we're keeping tabs on every bird every day, and then when suddenly we don't see a bird or get a signal for a bird in a while, that kind of flags it for us. It's like, uh-oh, where's this bird? We gotta ramp up efforts to find them. If they do show up at a trapping facility, so like in 171's case, she showed up at Pinnacles and the Pinnacles crew was like, uh-oh, she doesn't look good, we're gonna trap her. So thankfully she went there, she was at their facility, she went into their trap, and they were just able to trap her. That's the easy way. It doesn't always happen that way. Again, when birds do get sick, they tend to self-isolate, so if that happens, we gotta go find them. We try to get to them wherever they are. If it's on private property, we gotta get permission from the landowners to go out there. If it's on, we've had birds end up on Fort Ord National, we gotta get permission to go on the military base, all those kind of things. We gotta get out to where the bird is. Unfortunately, there's this horrible catch-22 with lead poisoning where, you know, the bird is sick, but it's not sick enough that you can catch it in the wild. So a bird has to get really sick in order for it to be so sick that you can walk up to it and net it on the ground. We have these big hoop nets, just picture like a giant butterfly net that we catch the birds in. If a condor is, you know, healthy enough, even if it's really sick, it can be healthy enough to just flap its wings a few times, and especially if it's up on a ridge, it can just fly right away. So it's this tough balance of trying to get to the birds, you know, as soon as we can. So it really just depends, it's a case-by-case thing. Sometimes it is like 171 where it's easy, relatively easy, and then sometimes it's us going out in the field, you know, multiple days in a row, following this bird around, waiting for it to end up in a spot where we can corner it and catch it, or sometimes waiting for it to get sick enough that we can catch it. So yeah, it's not a great sign. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, when a bird is that sick that we can walk up and net it on the ground, it's not going to make it. But 171 did, so there's always hope. There are definitely condors that pull through. It's really just dependent on a bird-by-bird basis. So we always make every effort to catch a bird that we think is sick, regardless. It's not, yeah, we never write off a bird. We always give them every possible chance and give them all the support we can give them, for sure. Yeah, great question. Yeah.
I was wondering more about your pie chart with the different causes of mortality. And you had about 20 years of worth of data there, and I was wondering if those causes of mortality and like the relative proportions have been the same for those 20 years, or is like, are individual causes of death either like declining over those years or increasing over those years?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So lead poisoning has pretty much stayed the same. It's an equalizer. It affects all the birds pretty equally. Some of these things, I want to say like power lines, but it still happens, but it's not as common as in some of the earlier days of the recovery program when there were more above ground power lines. Some of those have been undergrounded, especially in Big Sur and stuff. So like that has gone down a little bit. You know, fire is something that, you know, it doesn't happen all the time, so it's a more sporadic thing. But yeah, I would say for the most part, it's been pretty consistent in terms of these. Drowning is an interesting one. A lot of drowning in just anecdotal evidence is usually lead related. So the condor, when they do get lead sick, they're basically, because it affects the neurological system, their organs kind of start to shut down, and they get really thirsty because they can't, they're basically becoming really dehydrated. They can't process food or water or get nutrients because the digestive system shuts down. So they get thirsty, and so they go to a water source. And so sometimes they're so sick that they end up drowning in that water source. So again, like some of these things, and like predation is kind of like that too, where you know, a healthy adult bird has a very, very low risk of predation, but a bird that's lead sick that can't get away as well might have a higher risk. So lead is kind of at the end of the day affecting a lot of these things. But yeah, I would say power lines is the one that comes to mind as one that has decreased over time in general since the early days, but overall lead is still just the predominant. That has stayed very consistent, is lead poisoning. Yes.
How much did you say they weigh?
About 20 pounds.
20.
It varies, yeah, like 18 to 22 is kind of the range.
Yeah.
Typically males a little bit larger than females, but it's super variable. Yeah.
In your HPI map, there was a marker for possible 2023 feeding sites.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we're in talks with that. We have had a lot of condors in 2022 and 2023 kind of expanding a little bit north and spending time in like Henry Co area. And so, there's been talks. It's nothing for sure yet, but it's something that we're hoping to do is have another Crawford feeding site up there where we're putting out carcasses for condors as a non-lead food source for them to have. We do that. It's not, the condors are not dependent on that as a food supply, but it is just a really good way to give them a food source that we know is not contaminated with lead. And definitely, since there was already condors kind of hanging up in that area, it seemed like kind of a good place for it. But yeah, none of that is for sure yet. But yeah.
I think you kind of answered it a little bit, but not sure. Are they, do they mate for life, or are they just like whatever each year?
Yeah. I did talk about that a little bit. So I like to say that condors are just as monogamous as humans, right? We think of humans as this monogamous species, but really, some people do. They date someone, they get married, and they stay with that person the rest of their lives, and some people don't. So it's very similar to condors. It's also similar in the sense that we have male-male pairs, we have female-female pairs, we have trios with 2 males and a female, trios of 2 females and a male. We've had it all. So it really, it's tough to technically they're categorized as a monogamous species in science terms, but they're really not. They switch it up. Sometimes, if their mate dies, they'll find another mate. But sometimes, like in the case of 538, your mate didn't die, he's still there, he's still broken-hearted, hanging around, maintaining their own nesting territory, and he's just let with someone else. So it happens, and yeah, it's very similar to humans for sure. Yeah, they're a long-lived species, so they do tend to stay with a partner for a while before breaking up, but some are more faithful than others. We'll just put it that way. Again, same with people. Yeah, that's a great question.
I have a question about, it said 13 shootings of condors.
Mm-hmm.
So do we know why people would shoot a condor? Is it fun for some people to shoot at a bird, or is it?
It's similar to people, people shooting raptors of any kind. It's hard to say. A lot of times those are cases that we don't ever find out who did it. No one ever gets caught. It's, the condor is perched out in a tree in the middle of the field somewhere. Someone drives by and shoots it, drives away. There's no way to find out. Thankfully, that's not a huge issue anymore, but it does happen. And it's still happening. It's just not at a really high rate or anything. But yeah, it definitely still does happen. And yeah, it sucks. There's no way around it. I wish people didn't choose to do that, but some people do. It's possible they didn't know it was a condor and they thought it was a turkey vulture, and they, vultures in general kind of have a bad rap. People think they spread disease. People think they're dirty and gross. When in reality, they're cleaning up the ecosystem. They're actually eliminating a lot of those diseases. Their digestive systems can dissolve Ebola and all these crazy viruses that we're super prone to. So they are nature's sanitation crew, but oftentimes they're not seen that way. So sometimes it's just public perception. Sometimes it's someone just target practice doing it for fun. So then it's just a bird. They don't care. So yeah, it's hard to say. But, yes.
Which is a major predator?
Yeah, good question. So a lot of predation, condors are at highest risk of predation when they're in the nest, so fledglings in the nest or, small chicks in the nest. And so predators there, when they're still in an egg, biggest predators are usually ravens. Once they've hatched, ravens can still take really young chicks, but we've had golden eagles take chicks before. Basically any predator that can access the nest could potentially get a chick. It was pretty recently, I'm trying to remember what year it was, maybe 2021, that a bobcat caught a bird down in Baja. And so, yeah, it occasionally can happen that these larger mammalian predators can get an adult bird or a young bird that maybe isn't as experienced as flying yet. So yeah, there's been a number. I'm trying to think of what other documented predators we've had. Those are the big ones that I can think of off the top of my head. But yeah. A lot of that's happening with young birds or birds still in the nest.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Danaé.
Yeah.